you could prove that you have an identity and you're KYC'd effectively. So again, I'll just go through the slides. We're not going to go into detail. But again, that's the selling point of ZKPs. You can automate it, make it cheaper, more effective, and future-proof.
I think like one thing that always happens in these presentations is people talk about a technology that's a couple of years away. We'll have to do some pilots and test this out. But I think it's worth stressing that we can do this today, and there's enormous benefits from actually doing this on Ethereum. If we go to the next slide, I think for the last 8-10 years, like the whole DeFi industry on Ethereum has been battle tested. Yes, there's been hacks, there's been issues, but we now have very robust trading venues such as Uniswap. We have hugely successful lending markets, Aave, Compound. All of this infrastructure already exists, and all it needs is real-world assets rather than kind of assets that are derived from the Ethereum kind of native currency or bridged assets like USDC, where someone else is kind of giving those assets value. And I think like leveraging Ethereum's kind of legacy and all of the things that have already been created means it's the perfect place to launch one of these currencies.
Let's go to summary of key takeaways. If there's a few things that you come out of this talk, here are the things.
Yeah, I think I'll say this point again. Existing CBDC designs, especially if they're moved on chain, are a dystopia. They're not a world that anyone, I think, who's come to Devcon wants to live in. And we have a chance to create that utopia, but we have to kind of put some of these learnings into practice. And yeah, as I said before, we can do this today on Ethereum. The technology exists. It's been iterated on for the last 3 to 5 years. CKPs are performant enough to prove all the things that are needed today, and so we can make a much better financial system.
And I think the last point, I think the first mover advantage is absolutely underrated. And it is a huge opportunity for nations to effectively be the first and reap asymmetric geopolitical economic rewards if they launch a privacy-first CBDC on Ethereum. So stay tuned for our report, which is coming out, I think it's next week actually, and we're very excited to have given you some of our knowledge and our vision around this, and very much open to questions.
I think you can scan the QR code for questions, maybe.
All right, thank you, you guys. So we have a Q&A session. We see some questions pop up there already. All right, you guys want to start from the first question?
Maybe I can start and Andre can fill in. So one of the key requirements in kind of the Bank of England's kind of initial consultation for its digital pound was privacy. Like the Bank of England doesn't want to know what the citizens are up to. It wants to kind of have intermediaries that do that, other mechanisms that kind of ensure compliance. So in that case, yeah, the government doesn't expressly kind of do care about privacy, and they don't want to know about users' personal information because it leaves them open to another form of attack.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so part of our Privacy First CBDC report that's coming out is actually built on the work we've done in trying to educate the Bank of England last year on how to design a CBDC with privacy by design. And I think it also ties into the second question. I think governments are realizing they need CBDCs because the current systems are fallible. They're slow. They're not 24-hour. And they want to go on chain, but on their terms. And we've actually tried to educate the Bank of England on focusing on ZKPs so that they have the best-in-class privacy by design.
Do you want to take the Eurozone one?
Can individual Eurozone members do a CBDC on their own by law? So good question. I haven't off the top of my head, I don't want to give an answer because I think there may be some MiCA issues. I know that they can. I know that they can consider doing that. Obviously, I mean, if they're not part of the eurozone, if they have, for example, their own currency and they're not part of the eurozone, they would have to obviously exit the eurozone to launch their own CBDC, and then they could pass their own laws to enable that CBDC. So again, using Montenegro as an example, Montenegro is not part of the eurozone, but if they were, they would have to leave it. And even if they were to issue a CBDC, they would have to change laws to enable the creation of a CBDC in any case. So the bottom line is, can individual Eurozone members do their own CBDC? Yes, because they can remove themselves from the Eurozone, pass laws that enable CBDC, and create their own future effectively.
Yeah, we got 40 seconds for the last one. A little bit spicy.
Very.
We're still working on Aztec. We're pretty close to testnet. So yeah, we'll be launching kind of the first programmable privacy network on Ethereum. You know, you could use part of that to create these CBDCs. For me personally, like we get approached by a lot of people to work on CBDCs, then I just see it as a opportunity to not create the dystopia. Like there's kind of two paths in the road. We can stay in kind of like our crypto lane and pretend that we're all going to transact in Ethereum and like these assets, or we can try and bring this technology to the masses. And you know, that's why I'm here. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
All right, that's awesome. You guys, give a round of applause for the speakers on the stage, please. Thank you guys, amazing. Cool. That's nice. All right, let's go. All right, the next session gonna start at 4 p.m. So in about 5 minutes. Okay, see you guys in a bit. All right, you guys, let's go to the second session for today on the stage 6. The second session is when P2P electronic cash system. And the speaker is Conrad Urbans. Please welcome the speakers.
Hello. Cool. Who knows in which year the peer-to-peer electronic cash system paper came out? Anyone else? I'm sure you know. Just 3 people? 4 people? Okay, which year was it? 2008, right? So we're still waiting for that peer-to-peer electronic cash. I think it's fair to say that we've not taken over the peer-to-peer payments world. Bitcoin has definitely found PMF, product market fit, with store of value, and I don't want to argue that there are no payments on Bitcoin, but clearly the last payments you've made to come here, maybe with your Grab or Bolt or Uber, were probably not Bitcoin or on-chain payments at all. Just to show how ancient this paper is, this is 2008, right? So in 2008, GTA 4 came out. That's how long ago this was. The iPhone just came out a year earlier. People dressed like this. I think it's cool, but also very, very ancient. Bitcoin was largely, well, came out right in time as a perfect reaction to the financial crisis of 2007-08. This is how long ago it was. Right? I think we all here know what peer-to-peer means, but let's briefly talk about the cash part, because I think it's very easy to think of cash as payments, but payments are not exactly cash. I would say that cash payments are a subset of all payments. And usually when we talk about payments, we talk about something that's much, much more complicated. So last time you ordered your Grab to get here, you made probably a credit card payment. With that, there was a very big bundle of services that enabled things like chargebacks. Maybe you were using a credit card. And definitely there are some points and rewards, so I'm still waiting for the Visa and MasterCard airdrop. But I would just want to talk about the simplest of payments, like this very raw payment, which just goes payer to payee without all of these bundled services. So this is what we usually mean by cash payment, right? Like if I give 100 baht to a taxi driver, there's no way to charge back unless I hunt him down somehow. There are also no points, or, and there's definitely not a credit system. So for today, I'd briefly like to talk about why we haven't taken over the world yet, and what's needed to take over the world with on-chain payments. So I'll give a mini intro about myself, and then we'll go through a mini history just to honor our ancestors. And then I'll talk through 5 narratives that were popular, or that are popular, to answer like, this is the blocker, like we can't have payments because of, I don't know, scalability, let's say, right? So these will be the 5 topics that we'll analyze. So about me, I'm the peanut brain at Peanut Protocol. You can look me up here and also DM me here. So let's go and honor our ancestors. I think it's really important to realize the first wave of blockchains and categorize these very briefly. So we had Bitcoin, which I already mentioned. And then we had a bunch of payments projects that were strictly about this cash element, strictly about making payments happen. So I think Litecoin fits that category very well, and Dash definitely does. Stellar, I would say, too. Then we had private payments, Monero and Zcash. The only ones with smart contracts are Nex and Ethereum, by the way. So despite all of these huge ecosystems, well, some of them huge ecosystems, we haven't yet moved cash or payments on-chain. So when I was prepping for this talk, I had the honor to talk to some of these ancestors and people who are working on these very ancient projects. And I asked them, like, how are you going about trying to bootstrap your payment network? And one of the guys I talked to, he was running a campaign in 2017 trying to convince parking garages and like very local shops in one local city in the US to adopt their coin as one of the payment methods. As you might guess, it's quite a hopeless endeavor because you not only have to convince the garages, but also you have to convince all the drivers to adopt your thing in an ecosystem where there is the dollar already and people are used to coins and dollar notes. So what's the advantage of bootstrapping that one token, one chain thing? I think quite similarly, we have, who's been at ETHCC this year? Nice. Cool. You might have seen the Payments Cafe by Base. They were selling cappuccinos where you could just take your Coinbase wallet and just make a payment for a cappuccino. And there I wondered, well, isn't it the same case? What's my reason to switch over from that, like opening up my wallet and so on, when I'm so used to just tapping my card, right? Especially that was just USDC on Base with which you could pay. So here are the candidates. One common narrative will be scalability. So we need fast and cheap for transactions. I'll kind of argue against that. Then another one is privacy. I think highly important in a world where we have full adoption and most payments happen on-chain. But I will also argue that we can have a world where settlement happens on-chain, but stuff is still reasonably private. Then another argument that is very common is, well, payments are not on-chain yet, or haven't captured a whole like payments market in TradFi because stablecoins are relatively new. I'll also argue against that. And then finally, for the 4337 mafia, one common argument is, hey, we need better account management. We have to have account abstraction, all these like nice UX improvements. I will also say, well, that's not the main blocker here. And then finally, we'll go into the interop thesis. So let's start. I think this is a very common thing, especially in the early days of blockchains. This was a very, very common thing to hear when people were pitching L1s, but also still L2s, right? So the pitch goes something like this. In order to compete with TradFi payments, we have to be similarly cheap and fast. So Visa has 24,000 TPS, and my blockchain is so much faster. It has 69,000 TPS, right? I think again, this kind of, it's a bad comparison because you're comparing these very raw payments of just transferring value from A to B with Visa, which is this very, very complex, very bundled payment solution. And then also, perhaps more importantly for the argument here, is there should be a subset of payments where this doesn't matter, right? So if I do a $1 million transaction, and there are hundreds of thousands of these happening every day, or millions maybe even, well, definitely millions, then it shouldn't matter whether I'm using Bitcoin, which is slow and relatively expensive. But by the way, what do you think, what are current Bitcoin fees today? If I want to send $1 million to another country, what's the fee on Bitcoin in dollars? Any guesses? Yeah, $1. Yeah. That's not much. You can't do that in TradFi. You can't send $1 million to another country with $1. You can't do that, not in that order of magnitude, right? So clearly, there should be some subset of payments where it would be more efficient to already use Bitcoin, something as simple as Bitcoin, as the kind of international settlement thing. This is especially true for rare international pairs where normally you would be doing many hops between banks. So the way a TradFi international payment works is they're exchanging these IOUs and they have these very custom agreements between each other to trust each other with these IOUs. So when you're sending, let's say, money from Armenia to Chile, it might very well be the case that this payment is going to do 5 or 6 hops across the world. So first to a more local bank, and then to another one, maybe then to some US bank, and then finally to some Latin bank, and then finally to Chile. In the meantime, you don't know where the payment is, and the fees, you don't know how much each intermediary is going to collect. So already this should be more, even with Bitcoin, something as primitive as Bitcoin, like V1 of blockchains, it should be more efficient. But guess what? Here's my startup idea, right? Why don't we do a TransferWise, but with Bitcoin Rails, right? So the way TransferWise works is you have these bank accounts in different countries, and then they kind of just internally settle the payment. So they front it for you. They receive it in one country, then they front it to you in the other country. Well, here's the problem. For that to happen, you would need 2 banks to agree not to ban you for your Bitcoin payments, right? So if you can convince 2 banks not to ban you because you're not fitting their AML requirements, or they don't know what you're doing, or they're just scared of Bitcoin, or they think it's like some shady thing, then you might as well just have a normal, very classical IOU type contract with these guys to just do a normal settlement. So if you've identified this pair where there's a lot of sudden trade happening, and it's not been captured yet, let's say, I don't know, Chileans suddenly get obsessed about Ethiopian coffee. If suddenly there's a lot of trade happening, immediately there will be someone who will try to capture those flows to avoid all these inefficiencies with these hops, right? And you can do so with IOUs for these large transactions. So this very convincing narrative, like when you hear it for the first time, oh yeah, sure, let's use crypto rails just for the international part, is actually maybe not as strong for these like larger B2B transactions, especially when it comes to global supply chains. Cool. Another narrative, privacy. Well, we can't penetrate the whole market unless we have privacy. Obviously, if I go somewhere and I buy my coffee, I don't want to broadcast that to literally the entire world that I just bought a pumpkin spice latte, right? That's extremely embarrassing, and I don't want other people to know. I think, well, again, that does not much for the just Rails thesis, because you could have some kind of company that wraps Monero or Zcash or some other solution and makes it into a nice payment thing. But also you could just obfuscate using centralized means, right? And that hasn't popped up yet. We've not truly challenged payments that way. So I don't think that's the main blocker. Okay, another very, very common one. So stablecoins, very, very hot topic at Fair, mostly as collateral for DeFi stuff, right? They haven't necessarily, or at least early on, they haven't found PMF for payments. We haven't seen that much action in terms of stablecoin payments. It's changing now. I think there's this emergent, very nascent stablecoin payments market, which is extremely exciting. But that's also not the main blocker for the crypto rail thesis, because, I mean, if I'm just using it for one hop, so I'm selling my whatever, Polish zlotys here, and then sending them over to Brazil, then like it's just one hop over Bitcoin. The next block I'm already selling it, so the fluctuation of the value doesn't matter too much. And also, it's just false that you can't make payments with a highly volatile currency, right? Like hundreds of countries have, or dozens of countries have highly volatile currencies, and yet somehow people get paid and have salaries and so on. So another thesis, accounts, right? So here the idea is that we need something like account abstraction for mass adoption, better onboarding, stuff like account recovery, more granular permissions. I mean, if you think about it, like it's kind of crazy that. But again, there should be some subset of payments where all of this doesn't matter, because we do have these professionalized custodians. We can have, like for larger B2B payments, we could have all of that. So what's needed to unlock these payments for everyone, to have this peer-to-peer cash that is fully on-chain? So I'd like to argue that it's as simple as interoperability with everything else. So I mentioned early on this guy who was going around garages, trying to convince them, hey, adopt our coin for parking fees. And unfortunately, they weren't very successful. Well, because it wasn't interoperable with standard ways of paying for parking, right? So here's the thesis. Interoperability is necessary. It's a necessary condition for interchangeability, which makes money be spendable, which in turn is a necessary condition for any new payment network. So essentially, the idea of bootstrapping a whole payment network from scratch, that won't work, right? So what does this mean in practice? So I have coins on Scroll, but I want to pay on Tyco. What do? Super annoying. If I want USDC, 10 USDC on Optimism, you want 10 USDT on Arbitrum, super annoying. Another one is maybe I have some stable coins, but you want fiat. That's a problem. We recently asked how we could solve that. And this is what I mean by interoperability. So making it such that it's not one chain, one token, but any chain, any token, and even fiat crypto, right? So we have a November challenge, which is the no sex challenge to avoid using centralized exchanges for a whole month. Yeah, if you want to hit me up, I can share the details later. But back to this idea, how can we achieve this interoperability? Well, it's really, really hard because not all blockchains talk to each other very well. And also fiat and crypto doesn't talk to each other very well. So there needs to be some layers of abstraction that let all of this get routed correctly. And I think one approach is to lock up the funds and then let them be routed where they need to go. And this is something we've been researching for the past 1.5 years. But also, I'd like to very briefly mention that it might be the case that payments are currently being eaten by Visa and MasterCard. Crypto payments are being eaten by that because there's this huge emergence of cards, of crypto cards, which I'm using too, by the way. I think they're extremely convenient and a great tool. But we also need to ask ourselves, well, maybe we can skip that step, right? Maybe we can somehow be interoperable in such a way that the merchant receives this raw, simple payment without all of these extra things like the rewards, points, chargebacks, because not for all payment types they're needed, right? So maybe we need to unbundle the payment a little bit. As one of the final notes, I'd like to, this is a quote I found when I was researching for this presentation, and it's from 2014. And this was from someone from the Bitcoin Foundation, and essentially she said that you can send money over the internet, which is super useful for especially the unbanked, right? So maybe it's really interesting for me to see that this was the narrative 10 years ago, and still it's a really, really important part of what we're doing. So to summarize, we have briefly discussed scalability, where we discovered that for some subset of payments, it shouldn't matter. But if it doesn't matter for these payments, you need these banks to anyway agree, then you might as well go directly through the banks and not use the crypto rails. Right? We've discovered the benefits of account abstraction and easy onboarding for like a mass payment. We briefly discussed stablecoins and what role they could play in the payment space. Then we briefly discussed privacy and the needs there and like, is it going to happen? And then finally, we discussed what interoperability means on a technical level, but I'd also like to briefly touch on the regulatory level where essentially by having regulatory clarity, we can convince more and more of these TradFi institutions to be, well, interoperable with our payment systems. So yeah, long story short, I strongly believe that the next generation of banks will simply skip the neobank stage, so if it's interoperable with TradFi. Yeah. If you want to talk payments, if you want to exchange memes, please DM me. These are my details. Yeah, open to questions.
All right, okay. And now we come to the Q&A session. You guys see the QR code on the screen? Any question for the speaker? Please scan. Okay, here we go, man. The first one coming. All right, what are your thoughts on agents using stable coins for online purchases? And agents, agent to agents, that's the dev thing, I guess, human payments. Let's go.
Yes, let's do it. I mean, I think you know the idea of intents is much broader than just intents for a swap or a cross-chain swap. Intents can be just orders for something, and I can just express something like, hey, I want I don't know, a pizza for so and so many Bitcoin, and someone should be able to go around the world, whether that's a human or an a bot or AI agent, and solve that for me, right? I think that's clearly something that will happen, where all these searches will be done by bots.
All right, we have the second question.
Second question, is privacy a blocker for widespread adoption? Yes, but also we don't have widespread adoption yet, right? So if you think about your payments that you've made, probably this week you've made several dozen payments for coffees, Ubers, maybe to your landlord, maybe you've received a salary that were not on chain. And privacy, yeah, simply it's too small of a percentage of payments to matter in a big way. So I think it will be a huge problem and will be a blocker, but just not yet. And we have a path forward, right? Like we know how to at least have soft privacy without getting jailed.
More questions coming. All right, there's a third one right there.
How important is financial literacy? I think hugely important in emergent economies, right? So if you think about emergent economies, the financial products that they have access to, that people have, normal people have access to, are extremely primitive. A lot of people are still saving their salaries in dollars rather than, I don't know, something like the S&P 500 or Ethereum. And they simply don't have access to more sophisticated financial products. All of this will need a lot of education. But for now, I think also we can make more sophisticated financial products accessible to emergent economies through crypto.
And we have the fourth question.
Can monopolies do anything? Well, that's a very, very good question. I think the main challenge right now is that Visa and MasterCard have a very, very lucrative reward system, which the merchants pay for, right? So if you think about a credit card payment versus a debit card payment, if you're using a credit card and you're getting like some cash back or some other rewards, you're essentially getting subsidized by all the people who paid in cash or with a debit card. I think that's a cycle that's very, very hard to break. And that's why I think the first widespread on-chain payment system will emerge in emergent economies where penetration of Visa and MasterCard isn't that high, and we will have to build our own similar reward system, maybe some crypto native distribution methods like future airdrops and stuff like that might be a very good way to bootstrap a payments network.
We have 1 minute left for the Q&A, so maybe we can get this 2 or 3 questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So what specific domains or use cases for payments do you think are most promising in the near term? I think we have this incredible explosion of remote work and global teams in crypto. The majority of teams is somehow globally distributed. Payments are frankly a pain in the butt to manage. I think we will see a huge emergence of on-chain payments that then use some kind of localized off-ramps. Yeah.
Let's do the last question. Yeah.
Yeah.
At what level is adoption?
Oh, super low. Like, I mean, we don't know, right? Well, we don't know, but because it's very hard to estimate. But I mean, it's definitely sub 1%, and if you account for all payments, and probably sub 0.1%.
All right. Thank you, you guys so much. Applause to the urban, please. The next session is going to start in 4 minutes. And you don't want to miss the next session, guys. See you in a bit. All right, let's go to the third session. Ask question first. Anyone here know Pro Apps? You guys know who's coming next? We have the inventor of the Pro Apps here with you guys. So the session is going to be the anatomy of Web3 startup. Please welcome Petraccio Wordhaller. Let's go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I know you have plenty of options, and you are very appreciated for being here and for listening what I'm going to present. This is my 6th Devcon. I think I didn't miss anyone since Devcon 2, and it's the first time I speak, so it feels pretty great. The content I have prepared, I prepared very carefully, so let's get into it. When I was thinking, what's the best content I can bring to Devcon? I thought, well, my work at POAP for the past 5 years has been pretty intense and has exposed me to somewhat impossible to learn of. It's like in startups, you learn by doing. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna share what I've done. So these are some little bullet points. One of my personality traits is that I'm extremely upfront about how I think. So this is why the first item is offering unfiltered first-hand information of how to feel run a Web3 startup, especially the painful parts. I'm not here to sell you, yeah, run a startup and things are going to be fine, more like the opposite. Then, as part of that experience, I want to make clear what's different on the Web3 ecosystem than the Web2 ecosystems. Running startups is extremely painful in all ecosystems, but Web3 has several specific types of pain, so I want to cover some of them. And after all that pretty frightening information I want to present, I want to still make clear that for certain type of people, not only it is worth trying, it is what makes sense doing. So you will see why. A quick intro about me, although I am seeing most of those that I'm seeing, I know you and you know me, but you may get some tidbits that you didn't know. I am 37. I live most of my life in Buenos Aires. Being raised in Buenos Aires has shaped my personality pretty specifically, so it's a major piece of information. Argentina has a very deep crypto tradition, and that has given me a privileged view, specifically for what crypto is useful for, what's not useful for. So that's a key part of how I got to work with what I am. Up until 2015, I had a pretty average job as a computer repair person. I was a computer technician. In 2015, I was pretty fed up with my lifestyle. I wasn't happy how I was doing, so I was seeking for a change. I was already somewhat into Bitcoin, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go full-time on this. So I went full-time into Ethereum. Ethereum was an emerging technology that it was really hard to understand, way harder than it is today. And I spent the next 3 years, 2015, 16, 17, 18, learning about Ethereum. And again, it was a pretty steep learning curve. I'm a high school dropout, so I'm not a computer technician or any of those super fancy, educated Ethereum people. And by 2018, not only I have achieved diminishing returns in what I could learn, but also the ecosystem was in a pretty unpleasant situation. 2018 was right after the ICO bubble burst, and Ethereum was in a very ugly bottom. Prices were coming down, dApps weren't working, the roadmap wasn't coming together. So that takes us to our next slide, on which I plan on explaining quickly why in 2018 I started Ethereum. In 2018, I gathered a couple friends, and I convinced them on building an application on Ethereum that can do something that you couldn't do with any other technology. That was, for me, a way to show that Ethereum wasn't just a technology for speculating with financial assets or for gambling or for criminal activities. There could be things that you could build with programmable blockchains that really solve problems that people have better than any other technology. And one obvious problem back then and still today is that these days in our digital lifestyle, we don't own nothing. All the information in your iPhones or Android devices and in many computers, it's stored on the cloud, and you're subject to certain policies, and you don't have ownership of that information. And it's very common that if it's no longer a business for your provider to serve it or host it, they will shut it down, or they will change the terms, or they will start charging you. And one platform that's been subject to these issues was Foursquare. Foursquare was a Web2 app that you had in your phone, and when you went to a bar or a restaurant, you checked in and you got a little collectible. Now, the little collectible wasn't on a blockchain, it wasn't yours, and when Foursquare decided to change their business model, people that had thousands of collectibles were left in the dark. So I was like, why don't we build an Ethereum application on which these little collectibles are NFTs, and because they are minted on a blockchain, they are immutable and you have them forever, and they have all the qualities that NFTs have, like authenticity and provenance and several other things that don't really come to mind. So we start building this, and it goes pretty well. We launched in 2019. Well, I have explained this, sorry, I messed up the order of the slides. So that's the little intro of POAP. By the way, there's going to be a POAP at the end of the talk, so you better get your apps ready and some other housekeeping stuff that's really fun. Now, this way of coming up with the idea of POAP out of wanted to show that Ethereum was useful technology that makes sense brings us what is the most obvious early organs of a company, which is the idea and how to finance it. If we were analyzing major companies, companies have plenty of organs, like legal and HR and revenue, sales, purchasing, etc. But in an early startup, you pretty much have someone, the founder or a group of founders that have an ideas. And ideas are extremely cheap, like there are time a dozen. So ideas are pretty much worth nothing. But when you match an idea with a little source of financing, at least enough for the founder to come by, then you start having the embryonic situation of an early startup. And this is mostly what I want to cover today, because we could talk about the whole day about the startups. But in the Web3 space, we've been seeing, and we continue to see, extremely exotic ways of financing because of tokens and the possibility of creating crazy speculative mechanisms. And although some of these mechanisms for financing companies are fascinating and awesome, they are at the same time what make starting a Web3 company pretty much a suicidal mission. There's only a handful of cases of successful startups that had completed the cycle, that started with an idea, with some little financing, and that eventually completed a cycle and have become successful, sustainable, profitable business. Most of the crypto companies these days, big and small, are running on either extremely hand-wavy models, or they have launched tokens and they are still somewhat holding up, or maybe they are holding up really well, but normal business that check the boxes of a business that makes sense, I'm not sure I can count to 10. So I was talking about the different models of financing, and of course we are going to talk about tokens. But let's get first to the easier ones to explain. Bootstrapping a Web3 startup, it's a model of financing that I recommend a lot. This is pretty much the founder of the founding teams running it with their own money, not taking external capital and seeing how they could do it. And this is a very valid model. Many founders work full-time at something else, and then they run their startup on the side, and only after validating whatever idea they had or finding enough traction, they decide to transition to something else that's not bootstrapping. So bootstrapping, it's really easy to explain. It's pretty much not taking external funding, the founder carries the burden of figuring out how to pay the bills. And the bills in Web3 startup are extremely expensive for a bunch of reasons that we don't have time to cover. Then there's another alternative for financing, and we aren't going to talk much about them because I don't think in this day and age it makes sense, but it's traditional VC. Traditional VC, it's an extremely developed model. It's been running for more than 20 years. There are thousands of VC companies, but in practice, and this is an unpopular opinion, but traditional VC has nothing to do with crypto. Crypto startups have a degree of uncertainty that just doesn't fit the model of traditional venture capital. Traditional venture capital has some formulas and some models and time frames, and many companies have applied. In crypto, I don't think it has ever worked. I don't think it will ever work. The only crypto companies that are financed by traditional venture capital are pretty much not crypto-native companies. Like they could be custodians or financing services or compliance or legal or KYC. That kind of business maybe could qualify by traditional VC. But in my personal opinion, if you are building a business that qualifies for traditional venture capital, go for it. The content I'm presenting here might not be too useful for you, but surely the point I want to make clear, if you are a crypto-native company building a crypto-native business model, it's highly unlikely that traditional venture capital works for you. And traditional VCs may want to believe that it could work. You are going to waste your time. And now I want to skip for a second crypto venture capital because that's the hardest one to grok and explain. And I'm going to explain the grants and exotic financing because that's underexplored, and it's a very viable model for aspiring founders these days. Aspiring founders these days, when they have an idea, they have pretty much the three options I mentioned. Bootstrapping, which is probably not viable unless they have lots of money or some money. Crypto venture capital, which I don't recommend unless they're extremely sure what they are doing. And then there's this grants and exotic financing. Grants and exotic financing means there's plenty of organizations in crypto that have more money than what they know how to spend. These can be DAOs, they can be foundations, they can be individuals, and there are plenty of individuals. There are plenty of whales that you may meet at a conference or in a hallway or in a local meetup, and you present an idea and you're like, yeah, if I had $50,000, I could build this, this, and this happens more often than not. There are even some success stories of companies that are starting out of grants or this kind of financing and have grown to eventually raising millions from VC. So grants and exotic financing, it's a very valid and very honorable way of raising capital for an early Web3 startup that I absolutely recommend. And then, and I left it for the last item on the four models that I presented, is traditional crypto VC. Unfortunately, traditional crypto VC has evolved naturally. I don't think anyone specifically wanted to go that way, in a perverted model of greater fools. There are plenty of highly skilled, with plenty of social skills and abilities, investors that are meeting founders with ideas in need of financing, and they will convince them or they will promote them and help them do a token finance company. And that's pretty much a death sentence. It's a minimal chance of long-term sustainable success that a founder gets when they sign a deal with a VC that expects a token. There are so many highly convoluted mechanisms that start to play that even if the business makes sense and it grows and it checks all the boxes, they typically burn the founder out. Founders burn out, it's a pretty pervasive condition in this industry, and tokens make everything 100 times harder. So my recommendation is that first-time founders avoid VC. Even if you believe your idea is great, crypto VC, even if you believe your idea is great, only pursue crypto VC if you have a solid plan that really checks the boxes and doesn't have the classical hand-wavy models like, yeah, we are going to raise here and we are going to ship this and eventually we are going to launch a token and the token price will pump enough that we are going to have so much money to continue building without worrying about runway. That's a success stories for VCs, and I don't blame them, but it's this thing that I call it a suicidal model and a death sentence for founders. Eventually, the model of crypto VC, when the regulatory landscape gets better, may have a second shot and it would work. But in this context, on which tokens can't do profit sharing or any kind of revenue sharing or tokenized equity, everything token governed whatever, or utility token, or all those things, they are ill-fated. They are not worth pursuing. And it breaks my heart. I met some founders this week. I've done in my career over 200 investments, so I must have talked with 1,000 founders. It breaks my heart when I meet a founder with a good idea, full of enthusiasm, that is about to sign a term sheet and do pretty much this devil's pact that's going to drain their energy. So again, my recommendation is, unless you are extremely sure and well advised and well contained on what you are signing up for, just chill and continue your crypto journey, because right now the ecosystem and everything around is such a minefield that your chances of survival are so little that the trade-off, the risk-reward ratio is not worth it. Now, I don't have much time, so I will come up with a couple, before the questions, with a couple of housekeeping items. I plan on doubling down on the contents of this talk in an upcoming conference. I don't know which one is going to be, but hopefully what comes next after this, we will cover some time in 2025. Of course, I'm very keen on answering questions, but I also want you to know that because you came and listened to all this rant that I had prepared, you're going to be part of a POAP that we will all share. And that POAP can be minted using two mechanisms. One, it's a secret word that you just tap in the POAP app, and that secret word is collectibles. The other one, if you don't have the POAP app, is that QR code, which I'm going to try to scan now, if you don't mind. This POAP can only be minted while we are here. It looks like mine is minting. But then there's going to be another POAP for those that are watching the live stream or the recording, which is going to be for sale for 0.001 Ether or something, with the proceeds going to the nonprofit foundation It's Taker. So I'm going to get to that slide and I'll leave it for a few seconds. This is called an airship. And it explains where to set the funds and the POAP that you will get and some other fun stuff. This is not particularly for you to read, it's mostly so it is on video. And the last housekeeping item, which is a fun new launch that we are doing today, it's a GPS minting. It's a way for minting a POAP bound to a geographical location. This one is configured for anyone that's on the range of 7 kilometers from this venue. So I encourage everyone to do the scan location button in the POAP, get that really fun POAP, and hopefully one of all the minters randomly picked is going to win 1 Ether. So with that, I think we can move up to the questions.
All right, awesome, awesome. Let's go to the Q, guys. We have the QR code on your right side, and send him the question, whatever you have question for him. Are you ready for the question?
I am.
All right, let's go. So we can have so many questions here, and if you already have some question that people ask for that, you can just upvote it. Anyone? I mean, he did a really great presentation, right? There's no question for him at all. All right.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, and you guys have the POAP apps. Don't forget to use the scan the location, and you can get the POAP, like from Bangkok here.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm planning on being around the venue. So if whatever you want to talk.
Send the question. Can you send the question through this one so people can see the question too? So you guys use the camera to scan this, and you send the question through the screen. Is that working? มีไมค์เสริมให้เขาถามไหมครับ All right, 1 second. Maybe we can get เอาไหม Okay, his microphone's right here. Who want to ask a question? I said that guy. Okay.
Just the logistical thing. How do you choose? Like, how do you do the randomness of the function to pick the winner of the one if? Like, is it Chainlink? Is it on-chain? Are you using any hand?
I love this question. You know why I love it? Because we have worked really hard for the system to be probably verifiable. We didn't want this to be like, yeah, he has one. So we use a product called POAP.fun. POAP.fun is an open source software. It's not set up yet. You can check it out. But it's an open source software on which the system gets all the POAP's ID, and those IDs are tickets for a raffle. And at a given time, there is a little super basic formula that uses the gas usage of a series of log. And when the number of the gas usage matches the hash or the number of whatever the ticket was, that's how it makes a leaderboard. And I think it does like knockdown system. So it goes knocking down people, and the last standing winner gets a prize. We specifically wanted the system to be probably verifiable and credibly neutral, because otherwise, why could we do it at all?
All right. We have like a lot of questions. So we have about 2 minutes, a little bit. So let's pick a few questions. You can see down here.
Yeah,
let's go.
How to ask to the VCs that ask for token. I think if you don't have a very good answer for why your product needs a token, you have nothing to do with tokens, and you just have to accept that you shouldn't take funding from that VC. And this is extremely painful, but I am pretty straightforward. You don't need to work with VCs that want a token, even if that means that you cannot run your startup. If your startup cannot be run without a token, if you cannot get financing without a token, you probably shouldn't pursue it. Tokens are useless, not at all. Tokens are a fascinating coordination instrument. I expect tokens to create a revolution in human coordination at a scale. It's just that in this day and age, with the regulatory constraints, you cannot use tokens as means of financing. What are the best and conventional ways a founder can fundraise for an idea or an MVP they have? The easy ones, it's a larger L2, the larger DAOs of L2, like Arbitrum or Optimism, and there are many more. Mantle, it's another good one. They have huge amounts of money. They aren't afraid of spending. If you have an idea, you just need to come up with a minimal expression of it, something that can be built with 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. And if the idea is good, they will love funding it. You didn't tell the story of how POAP was funded. Oh, this is not a secret. I funded it myself. When POAP raised money for the first time, I was already several $1 million down in spending. And even after we raised VC money, I continue sinking more and more money. It's impossible to run a company that doesn't have a token and goes at the speed of Web3 without a really deep pocket. So again, this is something that needs to be known for any aspiring founder.
We have
this
one
is
more
all
extra minute
really
for the
expensive.
answer. We have one more extra minute for you. So we will have all the questions, so we have one more minute extra for you guys.
Thank you. When POAP tokens, we have no plans for a token. If the regulatory landscape changes a lot, maybe one day we'll reconsider it, but it doesn't look like it's changing. What's the business model of POAP? POAP has two sources of revenue. One is enterprise partnerships. We have plenty of companies that hire us for helping them do precious digital collectibles. These companies are businesses like Mercedes-Benz, American Express, Porsche, Goldman Sachs, Swift, and hundreds others. And similarly, we also make money by individuals that buy their mint links, and they pay $25 per 100 POAPs. And that's working pretty well. The market is really small. There's like 10,000 people in crypto that can appreciate POAP well. So we don't make that much money with that. But we expect this model to scale very nice once the market picks up. Are angels a good option? Yes, definitely. Angel investors are in the category of exotic funding, so I certainly like that. Follow me on Twitter to see when we do the chapter 2 of this talk, and I will be happy to dig deeper specifically on the things that you want me to talk about. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. The next question is going to start in a few minutes at 5 o'clock. All right, see you guys in a bit. We found a hotel card room here. It's lodge 61. The room number 708. If someone dropped your card here, I want you to go back to the hotel and can enter the room, all right? So we're gonna keep it on in the front here at the start if you lost your hotel key card. All right, guys. All right, let's go to the fourth session of the Stage 6 today. And the topic is how Web3 and RWAs unlock exponential wealth via computable economies. The speakers are Jason Potts and Justin Bannon. Please welcome the speakers.
Hi, everyone. So we're here to talk to you today about the computable economy and real-world assets and how this can unlock exponential wealth. Okay. So my name is Justin Bannon, and I'm a founder of a couple of real-world asset protocols, Boson Protocol and also Fermion Protocol.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jason Potts, founder of the Blockchain Innovation Hub at RMIT University in Melbourne and a crypto economist.
So the talk we're going to give today is based on an academic paper that we wrote earlier this year on the computable economy. So to start, if we look at the history and we go back, say, to the Stone Age, we see this pretty significant growth in human wealth. And if we zoom in a bit on that uptick, what you see is in the last 300 or 400 years, this real strong exponential growth in human wealth. And the question is, what's caused that?
Yeah, so what we want to do is to tell a story of how economies have evolved and what this means for, what crypto is bringing into this story. And we've got a narrative that argues that we are going through a revolution at the moment of a very origin of wealth. The standard story we know about this is new technologies. So, once upon a time this was fire, and then steel and steam, and we gradually worked our way through a sort of sequence of hundreds and thousands of new industrial technologies that gave us the modern economy. And that's the story of long-run economic growth is fundamental new industrial technologies. But there's a second sort of technology that is often overlooked, and this is the one that we want to sort of try and help you to understand here. And this is the technology of institutions. Institutions are a coordination technology. The very first one that fundamentally gave us modern economies 7,000 years ago was writing. Writing enables people who don't know each other to coordinate in space and time by recording facts about who owns what, or whose cow was that, or who owes me some honey. And that sort of beginning of writing 7,000 years ago was the beginning of history and modern economies. First institutional technology was a revolution in terms of human welfare. What other big institutional technologies we've had? Joint stock company, 14th century, 15th century, created the idea of sort of organization of the corporate form to gather resources together. We've had institutions in timekeeping and so on, with universal clocks working their way through. We've had revolutions in democracy and sort of record keeping of ownership and identity and other sorts of fundamental protocols. But the story that we have is that industrial technologies or technological change, fundamentally driven by research and development, is the main explanation for that hockey stick rise. But the reason it keeps going up, the reason we keep getting new and new levels of growth, is that these sort of institutional technologies provide sort of languages and coordination mechanisms to create new generations of coordination technology. And what we are going through now, the sort of the crypto revolution that's being powered up by AI and all of these other digital technologies, is a fundamental new type of economy. We've called it a computable economy. We distinguish this from an industrial economy, where all the fundamental institutions of an industrial economy were done by government, in terms of record keeping, in terms of fundamental asset registries and the money and so on. So this idea of this is where we're up to now in terms of a new institutional technological revolution to create a new type of economy that fundamentally works digitally, fundamentally works globally. We haven't seen a revolution like this for hundreds of years. That's the nature of the sort of technological change we're seeing now. The way we want to frame this is this sort of computable economy revolution, which is an institutional technology revolution made possible by a series of other technologies, computers and so on. What is going on this is a continuation of the evolution of compute in the universe. We described the evolution of economies beginning sort of 7,000 years ago through to the present, as a series of step changes as we moved up the institutional technology stack, from written language through to coordination, so on, all the way through. That process has been going on for millions and billions of years. And the way to think about this is that every so often on the evolutionary trajectory, we get these huge breakthroughs, these fundamental shifts in terms of the underlying sort of language of evolution. Evolutionary biologists call these meta-system transitions. And the idea is that a digital economy is the latest phase of a meta-system transition, where we're able to finally sort of start to write all of the things in an economy to be able to sort of interact with each other. Now, what that means is that where we are now in terms of evolutionary, in terms of the evolution of economies, in terms of institutional evolution, is that, and this idea of economies are not like, economies have computers in them, but fundamentally economies are computers. They're ways of computing sort of resources together to create economic value. Markets do that, organizations do that, protocols and platforms do that as well. And the sort of the next step in terms of how economies are going to develop and evolve is to really sort of push what we can do with that compute level. Justin.
So if we unpack the nature of this computable economy, let's first look at computers. So, I mean, computers will transmit, store and receive data in a highly reliable way. And computers will also run programs. So if you run the program 1 + 1, it will always equal 2. And because of this sort of reliability and the determination, you can build highly complex applications on top of them. And if you look at this, our modern sort of internet and digital economy, that's sort of evidence of that. However, if we look at sort of today's economy, what we find is that if we want to sort of transmit value, often what we have to do is transmit via intermediaries, like banks, for example. And these intermediaries introduce sort of risk of default, they introduce fees, they're slow. And also, if you want to sort of store and retrieve value, you have the similar problems. And so, also when you want to run economic programs on the current economy, we do this by having a contract. So let's say, you have a contract with someone to provide a service and they don't provide that service. What do? Well, you have to take them to court. This is slow, it's expensive, and it's fuzzy. So instead of having this sort of deterministic and reliable substrate, we have a sort of a fuzzy, unreliable substrate. And that really limits the complexity of applications that you can build on top. Our claim is that with a computable economy, when we're building an economy on this fundamentally more reliable substrate of blockchains, you get some properties that are much closer to a computer than today's economy. So, smart contracts can enable the transmission of value in a very reliable way. When we want to store and receive value, it's possible to do this in a way that is reliable, but that requires a particular type of procedure for tokenizing these assets, and we'll get into that in a second. But it is possible to do that. And so with this kind of combination of properties, it's possible to run economic programs on a blockchain substrate that give this kind of reliability and determinism that you don't get within today's economy. And the result of that is enabling much greater complexity to be built upon this substrate. So here's our claim, is that blockchain technology enables a new computable economy and unlocks exponential wealth through increased complexity. But the condition is that we've got to tokenize all forms of capital, all assets, with the same strong commitments. And so what we mean by strong commitments are that, all the assets that we tokenize and bring on-chain need to be trust minimized, secure and verifiable, ownership, and enforced by cryptography. And so, you know, most assets, the current on-chain assets have these properties inherently. And there are many, many assets from things like debt, equity, where they can be transferred entirely on-chain and will then have these kind of properties of strong commitments. But there are always a class of assets that will have a physical residue, physical assets. And these can't entirely be represented on-chain. So there's a couple of problems with physical assets. One is this physical asset oracle problem. So if I tokenize my car and you buy the token, how can you be sure that you'll actually get the car? And then this kind of fair exchange problem of how do we ensure that the exchange that's happened is fair and to the quality and terms agreed. And so you'll find there are a number of generic solutions for tokenizing physical assets. So the first one is this kind of centralized model where you will have a trusted entity that will hold the assets and issue a token. The problem with this is it has exactly the same problems as today's economy, where we're trusting centralized entities, and that doesn't have sufficient reliability for us to kind of have this kind of computable economy. And then there are two other methods. So one is where you lock up funds, and for this method, it's very transaction cost efficient because a protocol can just lock up the funds at very, very low cost, but it's capital inefficient. And so this tends to work for sort of low to medium value items that you would usually use someone like Amazon or eBay for, but it wouldn't work for very high value items. And then secondly, the other method is to lock up the actual physical asset. And here we have, I mean, that's more costly because you're going to be using physical entities to do this, but the capital efficiency is much greater because you can release the funds immediately upon lockup. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Why is this a good thing? Why are we sort of excited about this idea of a sort of step change in economic evolution? And the question we sort of want to address here is, what is the argument for why we might expect that hockey stick just to keep going up? Like, what is the argument for why we'd expect to see further and further growth? And, you know, the counter argument here is, well, you know, limited resources and finite planet and, you know, post-capitalism and, you know, it can't keep growing forever. But the claim here is that it could, and not in the sense of, you know, more and more resource intensity type of growth. What we're describing is not economic growth. What we're describing is economic evolution, in the sense that the fundamental coordinating mechanisms of an economy just get better and better in terms of processing distributed information. And this is a sort of crucial insight, is that to ask sort of what is an economy? An economy is a way that a bunch of humans come together and create resources and provision each other. You know, we use it for making stuff and doing stuff. But we also use economies for organizing and growing knowledge. Economies are the basic mechanism by which we organize our resources for innovation and our resources for you know, protection of environment and just all of the things that we want to do collectively. And that notion of economies as coordination mechanisms is the key thing we want to sort of emphasize here. That what just happened with the sort of digital, crypto, distributed, computable economy is that we've got a step change in our ability to coordinate our, you know, our collective actions together. And that shift, what does that mean? It means that we can start solving much harder problems. So industrial capitalism, what did it do? You know, many things, but one of the main things that it sort of did was it lifted a sort of medieval society, you know, particularly in one part of the world, and then gradually spread around the world out of poverty. It was a poverty alleviation mechanism. That it's not complete, it's got a long way to go yet. It's caused some new problems in that process around you know, ecological sustainability. But it was a mechanism that enabled, you know, a group of humans that got bigger and bigger and bigger to solve some fundamental problems. Economies are knowledge-solving mechanisms. What we can start to do now, if we can if we can sort of digitally connect all of the things in the world, bring them online, enable them to become visible to a mechanism, we can start to solve a lot harder problems. So challenges around dealing with externalities, a sort of the climate change problem, a lot of ecological problems, a lot of just fundamental things that we're currently relying on governments to do, or trying to sort of re-engineer human belief systems and so on. We're using cultural mechanisms or political mechanisms to solve, which we're making some progress with that, but it's not, it's nothing compared to the power of sort of being able to harness economic mechanisms to solve that. So one of the sort of, the reason that we see this sort of optimistic sort of argument about why this curve will continue to rise, not because of, economies keep growing forever, but economies evolve to take on and start to solve much, much harder and deeper problems. So problems around internalizing externalities, classic sort of ecological type problems. Step changes in innovation, particularly around sort of a lot of biomedical type problems and opportunities. Just that ability to bring more and more resources to connect sort of capital around the world into sort of taking these things on. Where at the moment, the only mechanism we really have for doing that are either large corporations or governments or various sort of coalitions on that. Again, it's kind of an okay solution. It sort of works sometimes, but it's nowhere near as powerful as it could be. And it's this sort of argument that the more we can do this, the more we can sort of drive real-world assets on-chain, the more sort of we can start to bring just information from all, from a full stack of information onto sort of trying to sort of solve these types of problems. So that's the argument for why a computable economy is good. Why this is something sort of aspirational that we want to work towards. Why the sort of next sort of continuation of that hockey stick isn't more and more industrial growth or post-capitalist growth. It's using global economic systems to solve even harder and more general sort of problems. So that's where we find ourselves. That's why we're sort of excited about this direction of what this type of institutional revolution toward computable economies can bring. Thank you.
All right, that's awesome. Let's go to the Q&A session, guys. So please scan the QR code here and ask the question. It's going to pop up on the screen. And you guys, here we go. Let's fast. Let's go for the first one. Who want to answer?
I'll take that one. Thank you. So the sort of economics that we're dealing with here is not traditional sort of neoclassical economics. The reason for that is that what we're sort of driving to is far more institutional economics, information economics, mechanism design, and trying to sort of understand what we can do with that as to design sort of global internet-based digital economic systems where what we're fundamentally engaged in right now is this new opportunity to essentially design economic institutions from scratch. These need to be integrated with economies as they currently exist. We'll use a lot of institutions that we've had from industrial economies to carry over for that. But there's an enormous opportunity here to just massively increase the scale and scope of things that are in the economy. And the first step to that is basically identification, attaching data to these things, enabling to be bought online. That process of bringing much more of the stuff in the world, the stuff that we care about and want to organize and try and sort of shepherd and so on, into the economy. So industrial economies did that in a big way from feudalism to sort of modern capitalism. That was a 600-year-old process of bringing a bunch of stuff into the economies, turning it into capital. But a bunch of stuff got left out of that. And critically, a lot of resources, a lot of sort of problems that a lot of sort of factors of production weren't sort of part of that. So I think there's a new opportunity here to sort of create a new type of economics. So we've called it computable economics for a computable economy, but that's the sort of challenge that we're trying to meet here.
All right, we have like 1 extra minute for you guys to answer the question, so don't be too rushed. We have time. All right, let's go to the second question. Which one do you want to answer first?
Yeah, I can definitely put the presentation online. I'll put it on the Boson Protocol website, so bosonprotocol.io. We'll have that up later today. Yeah.
All right. Is the presentation is publicly available for people? Yes. All right. Cool. Let me mark that up. Let's go to the third. Yeah. Can you elaborate that? More how?
There was one just up here as well. Was that
Yeah.
not?
Which one you want to answer? You can pick any. Yeah.
What was the one previous? Yeah, this one. Can we answer that one?
Can you scroll down a little
Yeah.
bit? Stop.
Oh, just the one above the
Yeah,
presentation one. Yeah. Okay, so this, yeah, I mean, this is one of the core challenges of tokenizing a physical asset, and it's this kind of physical asset oracle problem. So that, as I mentioned in the presentation, there are kind of three main ways of ensuring that you can have some control over a physical asset. One of them is to use a centralized sort of system and trust that centralized intermediary. But that kind of, well, it doesn't unlock computable economies, and is very much just using the current methods. So aside from that, you have two ways of doing it. One is you can lock up the funds, within a protocol, and the second is that you can use a trusted verifier and custodian to lock up the actual physical asset. And in that case, the protocol would still control who the custodian releases the asset to. And so those are the two main ways of enabling this for physical assets.
Yeah, let's do the last question here. Which one you want to answer?
The financialization of everything, that's an interesting point. So I don't see this at all as financialization of the world. What I see it as is the computization of the world. What we're trying to do is to bring all of the, anything that we want to be part of an economy, which means things that we want to organize and coordinate, things that we value and want to organize and coordinate, we need to bring them into an economy. The standard way you do that is with property rights or just attaching ownership and identity and prices and so on into something. One of the things that can go wrong with that is that it becomes financialized and it becomes a speculative object. But the reason that you're wanting to do that in the first place is because you care about something and you want that information in a system to coordinate. The flip side of financialization is basically politicization. When there are things and parts of an ecosystem and a global economy and so on that aren't part of the economy, externalities, what happens is that we have to use a different mechanism for coordinating them. That mechanism is usually politics. Sometimes that works great. If we have high quality politicians and everyone votes rationally, and we have a legitimate institutional process to produce only good political outcomes, that system really can work. It's just it doesn't always work like that, and not all countries have that sort of state. So this idea of sort of trying to bring in things that currently sort of aren't part of the economy, to turn them into part of the economy through a process of attaching, of sort of capitalizing them or attaching asset or attaching identity to them, enables them to be computed by the economy. It enables them to be efficiently, rationally allocated, to find sort of the best uses for them. So, now financialization is a risk of that, but politicization is the sort of counter risk that we're sort of trying to sort of meet against.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Please give a round of applause to the speaker, guys. And the next session coming at 5:30. Yeah, we go that way. Is it that way? Let's go. We come to the fifth session of the Devcon Stage 6. The session is going to be about the keynote, the next 10 years of Web3 in Africa. The speaker is Joseph Ayele. Please welcome the speaker.
Oops, sorry. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all today. I want to start off by asking who is here from the continent of Africa. Can you please raise your hand? Can you guys please stand up? Can you guys please stand up? Let's give these guys a big round of applause because, like many of our folks, have gone through crazy lengths to get themselves here with visas and everything. And this is the Devcon that has the largest African builder concentration in one place. And my talk today is around what can we expect over the next 10 years in terms of crypto innovation, and is very much inspired by a lot of what I have learned from all these folks and many more of what are the things that are being built today and what can we expect coming up. So 2 years ago at Devcon, we established the fact that it's actually the crypto ecosystem that needs Africa to reach its full potential of reaching mass adoption and utility-driven building to scale it to billions of people. And we covered the fact that we are the most populous part of the world and we're growing really fast. That is going to be where all the young people in the world are going to be based at. Even today, we have about 600 million Africans who are under the age of 14. That's out of 1.5 billion people. And we also discussed around the technology rails that exist that have allowed us to basically skip generations of innovation, such as mobile phones skipping landlines or mobile money, where that has close to $1 trillion worth of transactions a year. And we're jumping traditional banking with crypto. 2 years ago, when we discussed a lot of this, what was the reality is that mostly many of us were doing crypto to fiat transactions, doing payments, savings, and storing resources or investing using predominantly centralized exchanges. And a lot of centralized exchanges are actually not made to be banks. They're trading platforms. But we kind of figured a way to do that by having various liquidity providers, like people like you and I, providing liquidity on peer-to-peer exchanges to drive a lot of the value for normal people to access traditional forms of banking that we need. So where are we today, 2 years from then? Well, the one reality is that in the traditional world, we're still in the same place, that we're communicating value over walls, that the internet, as amazing as it's been at connecting us and letting communication flow, communication of value, which is through monetary systems, are actually very much gated. The internet continues to be very gated. The same way back in the days, you would have an operator basically connecting two calls by manually calling the other side and seeing, can we trust the other operator? That's the same process that we have today. So we are still working through walls in the traditional system. The other aspect of where we still are today is that a huge part of our economy is happening in the informal sector. That includes our GDP our predominant GDP is backed by micro enterprises. A huge part of our employment is in the informal economy. A huge part of our GDP is also driven by the informal economy. And also, a lot of our money movement happens outside of the banking system. This is a very important context for us to understand why crypto is thriving so much on the continent. Another big lens is that we have a systemic US dollar problem. Some of these numbers are a bit outdated, but we're importing more than what we're exporting. We're taking a lot of debt. A lot of African countries' debt has doubled in the last 10 years, and we're paying that debt plus interest in dollars, and we're trading with each other as neighbors using dollars. And when our currencies fluctuate so much, then we move our money to dollars. So that creates a demand supply. And on the supply pressure, we have a lot of exports, remittance, people sending money. There's a thing called BRICS, some of you guys might know about it, around some countries deciding to settle outside of the dollar system, which is creating a bit less pressure on the dollar. And there's a lot of aid and loans that come in dollars. So what is the consequence of this? Is that basically the US dollars are being rationed by the central banks. The demand for dollars is higher than what they have there. So what you end up having is the bifurcation of the bank rate and the black market rate, or how I call it, the actual market rate. And in worse economies, you see that being very large. In well-managed economies, it's very small, but we're living in parallel systems. And also, that makes the dollar a commodity. So people do unnatural things in order to access dollars because the upside on trading the dollar is higher than the trade on the commodity itself, which creates very weird dysfunctions in our system. And some countries have also created rules of who can own dollars and how much you can transfer it. Until very recently, the Ethiopian government actually made it illegal, meaning you can go to prison for it, for holding more than $500 with you at any given point. Many of my friends and family's houses were raided, just people looking for dollars. And that's because the central banks don't have enough dollars. And what that means, we borrow more money and then just rinse and repeat. So we have a systemic dollar problem. And so you look at that and say, okay, well, what is crypto doing? Well, fundamentally, what crypto has provided us is basically a digital version of the dollar, US dollar stablecoins, that allow for large-scale liquidity coordination mechanism in the informal economy, where a lot of dollars have been circulating physically or through various networks like the Hawala networks that call each other and basically move numbers around. What that has allowed us is basically for early-stage startups to be able to aggregate more liquidity than what a bank can in a very short period of time, and then settle that payment in a much shorter period of time. And this has been a fundamental value proposition of crypto. So, as a result of that, crypto has been thriving, it's been growing. Even in the bear market, crypto transactions have been growing on the continent. Chainalysis says we've had $125 billion worth of transaction last year. When I talk to the analysts and the builders, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more dollar that's been transacted behind that. Nigeria, of course, is the second most popular place for crypto. And Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, we search crypto online because it is solving fundamental problems for us. And so, but this is not just centralized exchanges. This is happening in other rails that have been built. So actually, some of the builders here in this room have built some of these stacks. These are from the builders in Magma, from wallet infrastructure. So actually making like SDK wallets that you can embed into your fintech application or your crypto application, so you can use crypto and fiat, aggregating liquidity on-chain and off-chain, which is actually not very easy to do, and simplify the on and off ramp process through that. Different types of wallets that are being created, and all types of payments, from B2B, B2C, B2B, B2C, serving like small businesses, medium-sized businesses, oil and gas companies, and even banks and payment service providers who are now using these startups to facilitate international payments. And people even issuing debit cards on top of your digital wallet in order to be able to pay online without having any limitations, because some of our banks say, I'm so sorry, you can only pay $10 a month. Well, if you have some resource, you want to buy a book from Amazon, how can you buy it with $10? Amazon is more expensive than that. So you're actually using crypto projects in order to do that. And so some of these projects are like way advanced than where I see a lot of on and off ramps. And so, bluntly speaking, if Devcon was held in one of the countries that were mentioned in Africa, the Devcon organizing team can pay all their bills using crypto. All of us would basically be using our crypto to make payments with fiat without even needing a fiat wallet, paying directly, just using the applications that have been built today. So there's been a lot of work that has happened in terms of making the user experience a lot easier. And if you're curious about it, just talk to many of the builders who are in this room. So with that in mind, what can we expect in the next 10 years? What are some of the innovations that we can expect to have? Well, fundamentally, I think the most interesting part of crypto to me is bringing whole economies and powering them by decentralized systems. Part of that is basically changing the foundations of our existing economy, and part of it is like opening up new economic activities that we did not know existed before. And this is where I think Ethereum comes in, because that's the most robust and the most resilient decentralized system that we have right now. So it's a beautiful merge here. And when we think about rewriting a lot of the foundations of our economies, we've got to think about both hyperglobalization and hyperlocalization. We talked a lot about US dollar stablecoins, right? So the answer is not, let's dollarize the entire African economy. Everyone uses dollars, dollars for everyone. That's not the answer. I don't think that helps us, and it doesn't help the global economy. So we've got to also think very locally. And one idea I'd love to dive deeper on is this idea of actually local currency stablecoins. At the moment, when we think about stablecoins, it's kind of synonymous with US dollar stablecoins. How about actually having our Kenyan, Nigerian shillings, Nigerian naira, Ethiopian birr, a lot of our local currencies, having a digital version of them on-chain? What does that allow? Well, on-chain Forex. That makes it a lot more efficient. We'll double-click on that. Cheaper local payments. In a crazy way today, with blobs, it is cheaper to run transactions on a layer 2, at least 5 to 10 times, than it is on mobile money or banking, which is quite crazy. Well, that doesn't mean blobs will scale infinitely, but it's just an interesting data point of what we can even do today. And the last part of the value here that we can think of at this stage is that it gives us programmable money, and that opens up a whole lot of opportunities and innovations that can happen. I really want to double-click on the on-chain Forex. Well, today, Kenya and Tanzania are neighboring countries, right next to each other. We even speak similar languages, and both our currencies are called shillings. But in order to make a payment from Kenya to Tanzania, you actually have to convert it to the dollar. Dollar has to go through the SWIFT system. It has to flow through London or New York or somewhere. It can take a few days, and depending on the volume, it can take even weeks. It's a very long process and long system. It doesn't make sense that we're having to do this as neighbors, right? With local stablecoins, you could potentially move from the Kenyan shilling stablecoin to a Tanzanian shilling stablecoin, both denominated in value against the dollar, but not actually touching the dollar. So this helps us move the US dollar from just being a medium of exchange to being a unit of account, which is a very interesting use case for it. So one way that can work is building a pair of liquidity, where an importer is putting money into the pool from the Kenyan side, and exporter is pulling money out of it. And the person does the exact same thing on the Tanzanian front. And because every trade does not fully balance, you use dollars to basically rebalance the pool by adding local currency on the other side. This is just one model. I am sure we can come up with way more complex and more interesting models to structure this, but bringing Forex on-chain is one of the most interesting problems for us to solve using local stablecoins. Now, when we think about that, we can think in a few $1 million value, or we can think about half economies. And I think the most important thing that we keep missing in the space when we look at the full potential of crypto is that we're not always looking at how can half an economy run on what we're building, and what needs to be true for us to get there. And the reason why I'm saying that is because many of you know M-Pesa, right? M-Pesa is one of the best success stories that has come out of Kenya. Half the Kenyan economy runs on M-Pesa. What M-Pesa is just a private ledger. It's a spreadsheet where they put some fiat in the bank, and the numbers move from different account names, and at the end of the day, it's basically settled at the bank layer. That's somehow a version of what we're talking about, but what we're talking about is putting that on-chain in a much more open, transparent system, right? For us to get to that level of scale at a much faster period, we've got to think about from different principles. And one lens that I can think of is using government bonds to back our local stablecoins. You convert the local bond into a real-world asset that can either be fully collateralized through a CDP or a better model that we can come up with. And by the way, if you do, I'd love to chat with you. And basically use that to distribute local currency through existing and new rails around. The Forex on-chain is one of the much lowest hanging fruit examples of where we can go, but we can bring so many other values to that. And in the future, it doesn't just need to be government bonds to do this. We can bring other types of assets like local land, productive land or protected land, or gold and silver and precious metals. We're generating so much of that from Africa at the moment. Or we can do other types of commodities. Like, this is such an open book in terms of what we back our local currencies with. Another pillar after local stablecoins that I'd love to chat about is simple finance as a stack. Now, here in the Ethereum world, we talk about decentralization a lot. Well, for us on the continent, decentralization is actually a very practical solution to a very practical problem. We have a lot of banking rails to build for hundreds of millions of people, and many of them have not been born yet. To do that, trying to build that in a monolithic way as a centralized company, as one piece, like Alipay or WeChat or Grab for 54 jurisdictions, and scale that in a very short period of time, is almost impossible to execute. So the best way for us to do that, in my view, is just to build a connected web of tools. Different pieces of the Lego that form a financial stack that come together that offer users a better experience and better options, right? I think building this in a much more decentralized way, to me, is like the only way we can get to the level of scale that we need to achieve. So for us, it's actually a very practical solution, a practical way of getting there. And we can build interoperable monies with network effects. Remember the walls, the operator? We can just bypass that and keep moving value across different populations and people in that way. Create cash apps with simple user experience, powered by crypto, but we don't even have to know that it's crypto. Today we have startups that are doing that, but we can scale that to infinity. And on the hyper-localization lens, there are many ways we can build around existing trust structures. Across many African countries, we have basically cooperatives and little communities of people. We call some of us call them table banking, some of us call them chamas, where basically people pull money together to save and lend to each other. There's a strong trust infrastructure that exists to enable things like that. We don't have to reinvent trust from scratch. We can leverage those existing trust structures to build very resilient, hyper-local economies. And I think that should be part of our roadmap. And beyond, so ultimately, it's just two people or two companies or two agents having normal financial transactions, right? No complexity, not much. We're not talking about crypto at the front end. This is all enabling that. Other areas of innovation that we can think about is like around credentialing, identity, reputation, credit scoring, bringing things that don't exist on-chain to create trust on-chain are some of the more interesting areas for us to experiment on. We don't have time to dive deep into many of these, and there's a lot more than other areas of innovation that we can build in the next 10 years, but talk to the builders around the table. And the other areas, bringing assets on-chain, such as real estate. We talked about bonds earlier, but different types of commodities, energy, power-generating structures that we need to fund and are actually revenue generating. We can experiment with so many of these that actually powers the fundamentals of our economies. So with all these ideas and directions that we can go, you might be wondering, how do I help? How do I connect? How do I participate in this? Well, the first is it's an invitation. It's actually an invitation because there's a lot of building happening on the continent, whether we have a lot of builders coming to Devcon or not. So it's an invitation for you all, from infrastructure, from research, from different ecosystems and chains, from capital allocation, from mentorship and support, from actually like working with some of the smartest people on the planet. There are many ways you can plug into the movement that is happening in Africa. And of course, why not bring Devcon to Africa in 2 years' time? Who's down for something like that here? Right? Well, yeah, I think that would be super cool, and you guys will have a blast joining Devcon there. But it's actually not about having another big event on the continent. It gives you a much deeper context to go and see this in practice. It is very, very hard to explain how broken the walled gardens are until you actually go and experience it in person. Or it's very hard for me to explain to you like what seamless user experience for crypto looks like without actually going and experiencing and making a whole lot of payments and living your life using your crypto wallet without touching physical bills, right? So it's an invitation for you to actually be part of the movement and work that we have. And lastly, because all the Ethereum events that have happened around the world have happened in places where it's just very hard to get visas, right? So to get 177 folks here, man, that was like a lot of work, and it's been a lot of collective effort. And there are hundreds and thousands more that you would absolutely enjoy connecting with and learning from. And so you're invited home. Welcome, guys.
All right, that was an awesome presentation, you guys. We have it's a Q&A session, so anyone want to put question, there's a QR right there. Just scan it and put a question there. We have a lot for you, brother.
Yes.
Let's take a look which one you want to answer first.
We can talk about the non-financial use cases. We talked about them later on. Yeah, this talk focused a lot on finance because it's just a lot to unpack. And each topic that we talked around credentialing, around bringing assets on-chain, and credit scoring, and like gaming and communication, there's a lot to unpack there. I will actually invite you guys to talk to some of our builders here to understand a lot of the nuances. But I mean, at the moment, like 500 million Africans don't have any form of legal ID, right? And the best that some of our countries are doing is basically having a data center in one location or two locations and putting the entire population's data there. It's like a honeypot of sovereign data, right? That's not the most secure way to do it, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot of ways we can innovate around that. KYC is one that really came up, like transferable KYC across multiple tools. So the list goes on. So the invitation is to actually talk to the builders in the room.
Any question you want to answer? We have a lot more here, right?
What do you see Africa becoming?
What do you see Africa becoming a well-coordinated roadmap?
I want to talk about regulation.
All right, let's go.
Because that continues to be a hot topic. And it's really important to us because many of our innovations are interfacing the traditional world with the crypto world. Because that door needs to be very fluid. It needs to allow money to keep moving back and forth for a long period of time until we bring it on-chain. And I think that's a very important problem. So I talked to a bunch of regulators. Many of the builders here talk to many regulators. There's some curiosity, there's some fear, because crypto can be a path for capital flight, a lot of value to leave in a short period of time, right? And that's an actual risk. And some of them don't even understand the fundamentals of this technology. So what we end up having is some countries like South Africa saying, crypto is legal, it's a commodity, we will allow it. And so we have a lot of builders working there. Some countries creating environments for experimentation, like sandboxes. And actually, this is a bit of a controversial view, but I think creating some sort of tax revenue from crypto transactions for governments is a potentially positive thing if it's done well, because it moves this category from a risk basis to an income-generating category. And bringing local stablecoins on-chain is, I think, one of the biggest value props for governments, because what it does is it creates a much more efficient capital markets for dollars and bonds. It brings dollars in, and it helps reduce the dollar pressure for local trade that can happen. So they have an incentive to see something like that. But there's a lot of people here doing the hard work of actually informing regulators. And we keep building. We keep building, even with gray area, we keep building. Like, the show doesn't stop. And I think that's something some of us in the Western world find it hard to kind of navigate around, is because even when Nigeria makes crypto illegal, we still have close to 15% of the country's GDP, proportion transactions happening in crypto, right? So, yeah, it makes you kind of wonder, what some of those kind of guidelines can actually have an effect.
I think we have about 1 or 2 questions more. Let's see what we want to answer.
Am I hiring?
Are you hiring?
I mean, I don't know, guys. We can jam outside after this, and recruit more folks to help answer the question. But yeah, I guess like what needs to happen before a DevCon happens there is like there's a lot we got to do on the continent. We have many communities doing real work. They need a lot of support and engagement, so I think that will bring a lot of value. We need to have more hackathons and builders, but like I think our builder community, like the startups that we have there, are from a user experience perspective, in my opinion, are like way ahead from what we keep talking about around usability, making crypto usable for daily life. Like whenever I'm in many African countries, like I don't use my card, I don't use cash. I'm just like paying all types of bills using my crypto account. And I think that's super cool and that's amazing. So like even the builder community alone is enough to host you all.
All right, give round of applause for the speaker. Thank you so much. And the next session is going to come at 6 o'clock. Stay tuned. Test. Okay. Anyone lost a hotel key? We keep it for you here. It's from the lodge 61. So everyone lost a hotel key, come to see the staff in the front. Thank you guys. All right, here we come to the last session on the stage 6 today, and the topic is decentralized economic opportunities. Communities using crypto and decentralized protocols to make local economic impact in Brazil, Nigeria, and Kenya. Please welcome Jambi Jorge and Arna Stone, please, guys.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Stick around because that was really the perfect introduction for our talk in a wider framing for how decentralized currencies are actually being put to work in different emerging economies. I'm really excited to talk to you about how we're using the free permissionless distribution of money to really impact people on the ground in last mile communities that are currently underserved by traditional financial systems. I am here as the executive director of a project called Good Dollar. Good Dollar is a universal basic income protocol whose mission is actually to enable anyone with access to a smartphone, with a cell phone, to be able to access decentralized currencies and actually onboard into crypto. We do this through distributing a digital universal basic income every day, and that's helped us onboard nearly 1 million people. I am thrilled to be joined here today with Jambi Jorge, who is the director of grassroots economics, which is, I would say, probably one of the leading projects, if not the leading projects, that's actually innovating with decentralized currencies and really breaking the monopoly on money in terms of helping communities to create more credit, more commerce bottom up through using decentralized tooling, and it's a great example of Ethereum in the real world. I will say that I've been building in this space for a long time, and it makes me very excited to see the talk that came before, if you will, that really shows that this progress is happening at scale. And Jambi is, I'd say, the zoom in, the double click in as to the framing that we just saw. So some of you guys might have seen, crypto is useless. Some of you guys might have seen this tuk-tuk yesterday or seen some people walking around with a crypto is useless hat. And the idea here is actually a very clever campaign out of Cello, which is that crypto is useless unless you've had a real need to use it. And the meta framing for all of this is that there are still 1.7 billion people around the world who are living in countries where inflation outpaces wages. If the past few years have been any indication, that's going to continue to increase. There are 1.4 billion adults around the world that remain unbanked. That means people who have no access to any of the financial services that Joseph just mentioned in terms of savings, payments, credit, etc. Most of this 1.4 billion people have access to a very magic computer that they carry around in their phones, which is a smartphone, and that's what enables them to access the same Ethereum virtual machine that we all use. And so there's the 6.17 million crypto owners today represents a big gap to close in terms of where crypto still has its biggest potential to make a real impact on the financial lives of billions around the globe. We're here to talk about decentralized economic opportunities. So what are some of the principles that we're looking at? The first is permissionless access. So how are we actually removing gatekeepers? Crypto is the most obvious example of that. Anyone can sign up for a Web3 wallet. Anyone can send or receive currency. It is this permissionlessness that actually enables local empowerment to happen bottom up, where communities are able to grow in their own super cycle, if you will. And ultimately, this is designed to drive resiliency and adaptability for economies that, where it doesn't really make sense that the global macroeconomic shocks of, say, the US presidential election have such a big effect on last mile farmers or communities all around the world. And so this is designed to actually increase resilience so that there's less of a single point of failure for individuals and communities. The reality is that still today, it's places where capital is needed the most, that capital is the most expensive. This comes as no surprise to anyone here from the real world Ethereum track. But in Nigeria, just for context, for a $100 to $1,000 loan, you're looking at an annualized interest rate from anywhere from 30 to 50%, right? So if you're actually looking to start a small business, it means that money is more expensive for you than it is for many of us from the United States or from Europe. And the user experience has also kept crypto adoption from happening for a number of reasons, right? So up until very, very recently, it's been very hard to access Web3 in terms of the sign-up process for a wallet. Certainly, if you don't have access to a bank account, it's not that simple to go online and buy $100 of Bitcoin on Binance. All of this results in there being a very high cost of experimentation for individuals. And this is what creates this narrative around crypto being useless, right? Is that with all these challenges facing the space, it's hard to build products that seem like they're of real use. However, in 2024, we're facing a new reality where not all of our problems have been solved, but certainly the potential exists to make a massive change. We see that there are a number of simple mobile native solutions. There are over 100 million stablecoin holders around the world. This has probably been seen as one of the key killer use cases of crypto today. And this creates the preconditions for us to really begin to build for real communities and real needs. All of this is critical because everything happening on-chain, everything happening transparently, actually improves our odds for financial access because it enables individuals and communities to really build credit history in a transparent way. As we just discussed, it's actually lower middle income countries that are driving crypto adoption today. So India, Nigeria, Indonesia are the fastest growing crypto markets, and 15 of the 20 fastest growing markets come from low income countries. And unsurprisingly, it's decentralized systems and currencies that are leading the way. This is most likely because of leapfrog innovation, which was referenced before, where when there's no pre-existing technology to overcome, people just jump directly to the next generation. And so grassroots economics, which has been building in this space for a long time, I consider one of the flagship leapfrog innovations in the space because they're innovating both on the payment rails and fintech level, but most importantly on the currency and the monetary level in terms of really breaking the monopoly on money and how communities can create their own value, create their own creditworthiness, and actually expand the amount of economic activity that they're doing within the community. This is where crypto has its biggest potential, and it's my true pleasure to introduce Jambi Jorge, who has been building this and implementing this on the ground for actually nearly 100 communities, and she's flown here today from Kenya to tell us about her work and some of the impact that it's had on their communities.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, my name is Jambi Njoroge. I have been working for Grassroots Economics Foundation for the last 6 years, and I'm really happy to be here. I am an advocate for community inclusion currencies, for poverty eradication and sustainable development. So, how do we heal a post-colonial legacy of torn communities and ecosystem? How do we enable communities to create scale and scale credit? How does this enable wealth creation to stay within the communities? This, commitment pooling. We've been working on commitment pooling, which is an economic protocol inspired by indigenous wisdom. So when I talk about indigenous wisdom, I mean rotation of labor association. I come from the Kikuyu community in Kenya, and we call it Mwethia. We have so many communities in Kenya with very different names for this indigenous practice. And it's not just in Kenya, it's even global. What you're looking at, the pictures here, the first one is a type of a rotation of labor, an educational kind of it. That is a service, Mwethia, women grinding maize for flour. That is an infrastructural kind of Mwethia, and there's so many. Okay? This is the difference of what was and what is now. So what was the shared economic commons, We had synergetic commitments, harmonious flows, accountable systems, ecosystem regeneration, democratic stewards, unlike what we have now, the fiat dominance, open markets, etc. Now, in communities right now, they have these 6 assets. For them to understand they have the 6 assets and to understand at what level these assets are is very important, and that is what you're doing with communities now. And what this image here is them realizing that they have it. Like, I have what you don't have, and you can benefit from one another. Creating that wealth is really visualizing what they can and what they have to offer one another. Now, I was talking about rotation of labor associations. So this is all about making commitments, fulfilling commitments, and accepting commitments. So just to explain rotation of labor in a bit, this is family 1, family 2, and family 3. All the families have needs. They need a house built, they need a farm fixed, So what they do, they create commitments backed by, commitments, and then they say, okay, fine, I'm committing, I will come and help build a house for family 1. I'm also committing that I will also help family 2 build a house. And eventually, they pool their commitments together, okay? So those are pooled commitments. So that means when I make commitments, I will accept commitments and I will also fulfill commitments. So when they all fulfill commitments, they are allowing accountability and exchange, and they have a clear and known agreed upon rules, okay? So, so eventually when they do a cycle of helping one another, doing giving commitments, accepting commitments and fulfilling commitments, there is a range of physical assets grown, social assets grown, human, spiritual, political, and natural assets, they change. Now, Grassroots Economics Foundation has been helping formalize these commitments by adding technology. And now it becomes easier for me to value what I'm offering in a community. It's easier because they have a unique signature. There is an expiration date. You can decide to have a demurrage or not, but a demurrage is very important to help with the circulation of the vouchers. And then it also means that whoever accepts that voucher has the right to redeem it from the issuer. Okay? Now, making commitments and fulfilling commitments and accepting commitments is paramount. And this is what used to happen and is now what you're advocating for. But trust is very important. And this is how trust was grown then. This is a nice illustration. We do a lot of games and practicals when you go when you're training communities. And this is how they understand the current reality, by understanding the 6 assets and at what level is which asset. And when they do this, they are able to come up with a vision and know how each person, each action step will be worked on according to the rotation of labor associations. Now, this is production financing. This is also a very important protocol that we borrowed from our forefathers. It only means that when the community members create vouchers, they put them into the pool. And when a financier wants to get some of the products that are backed by these vouchers, they will need to put in money into the pool and pull out vouchers. I'm going to give a good example of a financier who pre-ordered coconuts from farmers in Kilifi. So what they did, they put in money into the pool and took the vouchers backed by the coconuts. Coconuts take 5 to 7 years to grow. So that means so the financier had the money before, prior, and the vouchers prior, and the community members got the money before. So that means they were able to sort out issues, fees, better farming methods, better tools. So we're just basically bringing a nice socioeconomic process, that is about bringing together a nice blend of changing the traditional demand and supply models and, tokenization. Now, this is what the communities in Kenya are doing. They're using the USSD, and there's also the web interface. So this is mostly, the web interface is mostly for those who do not have smartphones, phones, so they can create their own paper wallet, and they can use one phone. Now, we have so far seen over 65,000 households using vouchers in Kenya today. We have 4 million plus worth of transactions, USD worth, and 5x average multiplier effect. So, pooled commitments enable us to scale into the future to our beautiful shared heritage. Thank you.
And so this came up in the talk right before, but it's actually how do we use these systems rather to create new trust, but actually to unlock trust that actually already exists on the ground. And this is what I've admired the work that Grassroots and Jambi have been doing for so many years now, is actually looking bottom up from the community infrastructure and developing tooling that actually enables those communities to unlock and assess value in new ways. Excitingly, this is one example of, I believe, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands that are happening around the world in terms of communities that are beginning to build circular economies using decentralized currencies that actually enable people to create their own value. This is a circular economy image from a community in Brazil that has hundreds of women that actually operate using the Good Dollar token as a community store to buy and sell services. We also have great examples of different entrepreneurs around the world who are using decentralized currencies bottom up to create airtime shops, enabling people to use crypto to swap into mobile minutes, into airtime value, which actually is a basic need for anyone living in the contemporary world. And I think really critically, the reason why this is relevant and relevant now is because now we start to compose the full stack that actually enables this to become practical and possible, and it involves more than just technology, right? And so what we see is that building the stack bottom up from the technical layer, what makes it actually useful for real people, for the hundreds of people that Jambi and Grassroots have touched, is actually the social element, the community and education element that actually brings people along and customizes these technologies for their needs. So to bring it back, crypto is useful, but it's most useful in an ecosystem that has all of the different components of the stack that make it useful. And so this suit that I'm wearing is not just for fun. It is fun, though. It's to represent the idea of an ecosystem and the value of an ecosystem, and that actually being the critical enabling linchpin to making the real world Ethereum useful. And I think everyone at Devcon who's made such an expert effort to come here to actually contribute to this ecosystem understands that. And the more localized ecosystems that we develop, the more we will see this come true. So yes, this is the crypto today. Real world Ethereum is decentralizing economic opportunity. And I think we need to stay passionate and stay focused, because this is still the biggest upgrade to money since it went digital. We see decentralized economies actually upgrading the money itself, and it enables money to flow back to the parts of the economy that are otherwise deemed unprofitable or non-profitable. And this is what Grassroots and other projects are doing. It actually enables the real wealth to come back into community, because in many communities around the world, the people are there, the resources are there, the desire to collaborate is there, but what's actually missing is money. And so if we can actually innovate on the money itself through using the right tooling, then we are able to support the decentralization of economic opportunity that we want to see happen. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to the Ethereum Foundation for making this possible.
All right, awesome guys. So again, Q&A session. We have the QR code on the screen. Scan it and send the question to the screen so we can see what you have burning question here. All right, guys. Let's see. I think people just wait a little bit. People are still scanning. I think we have about a few minutes while we're waiting for them to send the question. Anything you want to say, add on a little bit? Yeah.
just.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, there's something else I wanted to add, like for the pooling, the production financing page. When you put in money, community members can now withdraw that, off ramp that via Valora, MiniPay, through Kotani, OneRamp, Phone Bank into Kenya shillings. So it's really been amazing. And I would also want to thank Ethereum Foundation for making sure that I got here. Thanks.
all right. You have a question? All right. Do you mind pass the mic? 1 second. Oh, here's the question. But let's hear from the ladies first.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks for calling me lady. I'm not sure I identify that way, but sure.
Sorry.
It's okay. So, Jemdi, this is a question for you. What are the biggest barriers that are still faced? Because you've obviously had to overcome quite a few to get the technology in place to support these existing traditional systems. What are the barriers that still exist, if any, in utilizing technology in this way?
Yeah. So one of the major barriers that we've had to, we are still even experiencing right now is the network connectivity in some of the rural areas. So when they are trying to sort of exchange into the swap, so network connectivity in some areas really is a challenge, and we normally sometimes have to force them to go to the nearest cyber cafe or, the nearest school, because we're assuming that is where they would get like network. So movement challenges, and yeah, I would say that is like one of the major, and really phones in some rural areas. So we've had to like even give a group like one phone where they need to like log out, log in using the paper wallets. Mm-hmm. Sure.
All right, we have 3 questions on the screen. Anything you want to answer first?
So the first one, how do we quantify impact? So now, when I was talking about production financing, so what we do, we borrow this from the past, okay? So in community members, in communities, there were leaders in each community, like village elders. They would sit and decide the next rotation of labor activities. So now, we don't have staff at like salaried staff. So what we do, we work with stewards, and stewards are members of the community. So they are the ones that handhold the community members. So whenever the communities are meeting for rotation of labor, whatever it is that they do, is it building houses? Is it building roads or tilling farms? So they send that as a report. So what we do, we put in $1 into the pool, get their vouchers. So the vouchers in this case is backed by their commitments or their M&E services. So when the report is in, then we pay them back using the voucher. So really, the trades on the Sarafu.network platform, represent the reports that they've sent. So these trades in the eastern part of Kenya equals to 10 houses, 5 etc.
All right, that's awesome. Let's go to the next one. I think you have like 3 minutes to question more. Yeah. Yeah. No, you take your time.
I'm going to address the first 2 in one answer. So how do you actually deal with onboarding? I'm going to speak now from we gave money away. From the perspective of good dollar UBI or free money has actually proved to be an incredibly effective onboarding method in terms of bringing people into Web3. And I think what's important about that is that we see that onboarding mechanism then translates into people exploring a deeper financial life on-chain. And so obviously a good UX, simple onboarding experience, but actually making assets free and accessible and encouraging people to experiment has been critical to onboarding people, retaining people, and encouraging their ability and desire to experiment. There was one other question, but I forgot. Oh, it's about creating trust between local...
How can trust between local communities in emerging countries and the global crypto ecosystem can be unlocked?
So I think in my experience, a lot of this is actually happening on the local and the community level, right? So it's through local community leaders that create the relevant education and context for the individuals that come along or the individuals that are also members of that community. And as builders, it's about having the relevant on and off ramps and the relevant tools that are specific to that particular country and country context. So I think that has actually proven to be on and off ramps which come up all the time, and the wallet experience are the really critical bridges in the actual user experience when it goes from, someone using a very specific local app or currency such as Grassroots versus the cash out experience, aka fiat in my pocket, mobile minutes on my phone, Ethereum in my wallet.
All right. Anything, three obvious questions you want to answer? We have like 1 more minute if you want to. Yeah.
How do we deal with failures of trust within a group? Like, for our experience as grassroots economists, we work with already existing groups that have their own constitution, and they know how they deal with some of these challenges. So what you're doing is just adding technology to a practice that they already know, that has already been there. So most of the times the groups follow what they normally do, even without, like, amongst the community. Is it going to the chief? Is it going to the village elder? How do we sit down and sort that out? So mostly it's within the groups.
Want to do one more? If you have a short one, we have a 30-second. We can do it if you want to.
How could these initiatives be protected from bots?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. How can initiatives be protected from bots? It's a great question. Certainly when you're giving free money away, it's something that you have to confront and deal with. Decentralized identity or decentralized secure unique identity is not a new problem, and there's multiple ways to skin the cat. I'd say actually what makes me the most excited now is like new solutions that are based off of existing community and trust that actually enable members of groups to verify one another and verify the unique identity of one another. And I think this is a space that many builders in Ethereum have been tackling for many years, and we're about to see a next generation of solutions that are actually much more usable for individuals to verify one another, and I think that's how bots will be dealt with moving forward.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And
Thank you.
Please give a applause to the speaker, guys. All right, you guys, this is the last session for today, and tomorrow we have the first session at 9:45 on the stage 6. So please enjoy Bangkok outside, a lot of good food there, and you can have a good night. Bye-bye.
you.